Welcome to Last Moments. Today I'm looking at the most foolish TikToker deaths ever recorded, all lost in the most avoidable ways possible. From a creator staging a fake robbery with a real gun gone wrong, to a content creator who saw a thunderstorm rolling and walked straight toward it like he was Zeus. It was the 19th of November, 2019, in Karachi, Pakistan. The afternoon heat pressed down on a busy commercial district where vendors called out to passing shoppers. Nobody there knew that a young man nearby was about to make the last decision of his life. Abdul Rahman, 23 years old, was a content creator who had spent the better part of a year chasing something that always seemed just out of reach. A video that would finally go viral, a moment that people would stop scrolling to watch, a reaction so genuine that nobody could look away. His TikTok page contained usual things: street pranks, surprise reactions, staged moments with strangers, but none of it gained the massive traction he hoped for, so he came up with a new idea. He would stage a fake robbery in a crowded marketplace, pull out a gun, fire a shot into the air, and capture the panic of everyone around him on a live stream, then reveal it was all a joke. The problem was that Abdul wanted the moment to feel real. A toy gun would not make the right sound, a prop would not produce the right reaction, and if people saw through the illusion too quickly, the whole thing would fall apart. So he obtained a real firearm through illegal means. But hey, it's America. It was, in his mind, the detail that would make everything work. I can already think of some many ways this could go wrong. On the day of filming, he arrived at the marketplace with two friends who were recording from different angles. One stood across the street, the other farther down the walkway. Rahman carried his phone in one hand, already live streaming, joking as he walked through the crowd while preparing for the stunt. As he reached into his jacket and to draw the weapon, his attention divided between the camera and the strangers around him. What Abdul either failed to notice or did not fully understand was that the pistol was loaded without a safety feature. Abdul was an amateur in firearms handling. He was shaped for performance rather than safety. As he tried to pull the gun out of his jacket, he ignorantly gripped it hard with his index finger on the trigger. That tightening was more than enough, as the trigger required almost no pressure, and the gun discharged instantly, shooting him at point-blank range. Before his arm had even fully extended, before Abdul himself could even understand what had happened, the sound echoed through the marketplace. People immediately ducked, screamed, and scattered in different directions. Some ran for cover while others froze, trying to determine where the shot had come from. At least that was the exact experience he wanted to create. For a brief moment, Abdul himself seemed confused. One of the cameras captured him, staring downward with a puzzled expression. The confidence that had been on his face seconds earlier disappeared. The bullet had entered his upper abdomen, passing through his liver and damaging several major blood vessels before coming to rest inside his body. Although the wound did not appear dramatic from the outside, severe internal bleeding had already begun. That's the thing about internal bleeding. The body keeps everything hidden until it can't anymore. His friends initially thought the discharge had been part of the prank. Then they realized something was terribly wrong. The footage became chaotic as they abandoned their cameras and rushed toward him. His friends immediately called emergency services and attempted to keep him conscious while waiting for help. Paramedics arrived within minutes and transported him to a nearby hospital, where doctors discovered extensive internal injuries caused by the bullet's path through his abdomen. Surgeons performed emergency surgery, but the damage to major blood vessels had already resulted in severe blood loss. Abdul was pronounced dead later that evening. Police recovered the handgun and reviewed footage from the live stream and nearby cameras. Investigators ultimately determined that the shooting was accidental, caused by negligent handling of a loaded firearm during preparations for the prank. Abdul walked into a crowded market with a loaded gun and a plan that had no room for error. The next TikToker built his own aircraft, announced the maiden flight to his followers, and climbed in anyway. It was on the 16th of July, 2022, in Chungcheong Province in South Korea. The skies above Cheongju were clear and blue, the kind of morning that makes everything feel possible, the kind that hides nothing of what is coming. Kang Min-jae was 29 years old. He lived in Incheon. Min-jae was one of South Korea's fastest rising TikTok creators. a young man who had built his following on speed, daring, and the kind of confidence that the camera loves. His videos featured high-speed motorcycle rides, sports car challenges, and driving stunts that pulled in hundreds of thousands of views, and the more attention he received, the more ambitious he became. He taught himself almost everything through online tutorials, and success after success convinced him that determination could replace training. That's a belief that works right up until the moment it doesn't. And in most fields, the moment it isn't forgiving. When competition on TikTok grew fiercer, Min Jae went searching for something no one else was doing. And that search led him to videos of people building ultralight aircraft. The idea was perfect for his brand. Unusual, visually stunning, and almost guaranteed to go viral. So he purchased a kit, announced the project to his followers, and made it the centerpiece of his channel. For months, viewers watched him assemble parts and install controls, with some praising his boldness and others urging him to consult licensed pilots and certified aircraft builders. He appreciated the advice, but rarely followed it. As the aircraft neared completion, pressure mounted. Followers constantly asked when the first flight would happen, and wanting maximum impact, Min Jae announced the maiden flight would be live-streamed. The deadline made him rush. Several critical mistakes were made during final preparation. Components were never independently inspected. Added cameras and live streaming equipment shifted the aircraft's balance. And most dangerously, Min Jae modified the engine for more power than the airframe was ever designed to handle. I wonder if he thought he was an engineer or a scientist. On that clear morning, thousands of viewers joined the live stream as the aircraft rolled down the runway and lifted smoothly into the air. For the first few minutes, everything looked exactly as planned, and Min Jae narrated excitedly to his audience as the aircraft climbed to roughly 400 feet. Then, about 7 minutes after takeoff, a sharp metallic sound crackled through the live stream audio. The aircraft began to vibrate. What investigators would later piece together was that the modified engine, pushed beyond what the airframe was built to handle, had begun shedding internal components under the stress of sustained flight, stripping the aircraft of thrust and triggering violent oscillations that the control surfaces could not correct. The added weight of the live streaming equipment had already pushed the center of gravity outside safe limits, making the aircraft nearly impossible to stabilize even under normal conditions. Min Jae glanced at his controls, the excitement draining from his face as he realized something was deeply wrong. Witnesses on the ground watched the aircraft move erratically as the vibrations intensified and stability collapsed entirely. He fought the controls with everything he had, but recovery was already beyond reach. The aircraft crashed hard in an open field near an airstrip. 7 minutes. That's all it took for something he had spent months building to start coming apart. Emergency responders arrived within minutes and rushed him to hospital, where doctors found severe head trauma, multiple fractures, and extensive internal injuries consistent with a high-impact crash. Despite the efforts of trauma specialists, his injuries were unsurvivable. Kang Min Jae died later that day. Investigators concluded that unauthorized engine modifications, poor balance, inadequate testing, and a complete absence of aviation training had combined to cause the crash. He was not reckless because he did not care. He was reckless because he cared too much about the content and not enough about the craft. The next story belongs to a creator who also climbed somewhere he wasn't supposed to be, except his aircraft was a steel beam above a railway line on a wet Saturday morning. It was on the 20th of October, 2019 in Wisconsin. The industrial district of Milwaukee sat quiet under a pale morning sky, its old freight overpass cutting across a tangle of active railway lines below, the steel framework still damp from an overnight drizzle that had left every surface cold and slick. Jude Matthews was 26 years old and worked as a maintenance technician for a commercial property company in the city. The job was steady and paid the bills, but it rarely excited him. And like many young people at the time, he had started looking for something more. TikTok was growing fast, and Jude had watched ordinary people turn phone cameras and creative ideas into real careers. He believed the platform was still young enough for someone new to build something meaningful on it, and so after work each evening, he filmed around Milwaukee, studying trends, refining his editing, and searching for locations that would make his content stand out. His page focused on dramatic urban scenery, bridges, rooftops, and industrial views that most creators weren't bothering with. Early results were encouraging, with several videos pulling hundreds of views, and each successful post pushed him to aim higher. By October, he had convinced himself that one viral video could change everything. I find that particular belief the most dangerous thing about content creation. It makes every line feel crossable. On a cool Saturday morning, he visited the freight overpass in an industrial district on the city's outskirts. A public viewing path nearby offered a clear and safe vantage point over the railway lines below, but Jude wanted something more dramatic, an angle that would separate his footage from anything else on the platform. He found a gap in a chain link barrier and climbed through, making his way onto a narrow steel maintenance section beneath the overpass structure. He set up his phone and recorded several clips. The footage looked strong. Wanting one final shot, he moved farther along a steel beam to frame the skyline directly behind him. The safe spot was right there. He'd already filmed from it. But then he decided it wasn't enough. Passers-by nearby later told investigators they saw him pause briefly to adjust his footing on the wet metal. Then he slipped. He tried to recover his balance, but the momentum carried him sideways off the beam, and he fell several feet onto a concrete service platform below. Workers in an adjacent warehouse heard the impact and called emergency services immediately. Paramedics arrived within minutes to find Jude unconscious but still breathing, having sustained severe head trauma and multiple fractures from the fall. Crews tried stabilizing him on scene and transported him urgently to a regional trauma center. Emergency surgery lasted hours. Despite the efforts of medical staff, the brain damage was too extensive to survive. Jude Matthews was pronounced dead later that evening. The same Saturday morning, he had set out to film a video. Investigators found no evidence of foul play, equipment failure, or a prior medical episode. His death was ruled accidental, caused by blunt force trauma sustained during the fall. He went out that morning to film something worth watching but never made it back home. What makes Jude's story so difficult to sit with is how familiar his ambition was. The safe spot existed, and he knew it. But the pressure to create something bigger than what was permitted led him one step further than the structure could hold him. He never posted that final clip. Jude moved one beam too far on a wet Saturday morning, chasing a better angle. The next TikToker moved toward a storm instead of away from it, and streamed the whole thing live. It was the 6th of September, 2020. In Florida, and the Atlantic was already restless before the sun had fully set, dark clouds rolling in from the water in thick churning walls, the kind of sky that sent coastal residents straight to their shutters. Peter Chadwick was 23 years old, a TikTok creator who filmed storms, rough seas, and outdoor environments for a modest but growing audience. He had learned something early in his content journey, that danger pulled more views than safety ever would, that lightning clips spread faster, and that live streams kept people watching longer than anything pre-recorded could. When a fast-moving thunderstorm developed offshore in early September, Peter saw an opportunity. National Weather Service forecasts pointed to frequent cloud-to-ground lightning, heavy rainfall, and elevated coastal winds. Local authorities had already issued advisories discouraging shoreline access. Lifeguard stations had cleared the beach, and access points were closed to the public. Peter set up on a rocky outcrop extending seaward from the main beach, exposed on all sides but offering a clear, unobstructed view of the approaching system. He announced he was streaming live footage from the coast during the storm, and viewers began joining as the sky darkened over the water. Early footage showed distant lightning flickering offshore, and the stream was gaining traction as conditions visibly worsened. Warnings began appearing in the chat as lightning became more frequent. Viewers told him to get off the rocks. Peter acknowledged the comments but pointed out that most of the strikes were still occurring well offshore and that the heaviest part of the storm appeared to be some distance away. He believed he had enough time before conditions became genuinely dangerous at his position. If it was that easy to study, the meteorologist wouldn't bother going to school. As thunder intervals shortened, he stayed, deciding repeatedly to remain for just a few more minutes, monitoring the storm as it moved and continuing to speak to his viewers. What he did not account for was how far ahead of a storm's main rain core lightning can travel, how the leading edge of a thunderstorm cell can produce cloud-to-ground strikes well before the rain or wind arrives at ground level. He was still watching the storm approach when one reached him. A direct lightning strike connected with the point where Peter was standing, sending a massive electrical surge through his body in an instant. He collapsed onto the rocks, the phone falling from his hand, the live stream continuing in distorted audio for a brief moment before going dark. Beach patrol staff nearby had witnessed the strike and immediately contacted emergency services. When paramedics reached the location, Peter was unresponsive, with no pulse and no breathing. The storm was still active overhead, and the rocky terrain made evacuation difficult, adding precious minutes to an already critical situation. Resuscitation was attempted on site and continued through transport. His heart never responded. Well, you can say even his heart was shocked by the event that unfolded. Doctors who reviewed the case confirmed that the lightning strike had caused immediate cardiac arrest, the electrical discharge disrupting the heart's natural rhythm so completely that it ceased all effective pumping within seconds of impact. At the same time, the current passed through his central nervous system, causing instant loss of consciousness and irreversible neurological damage. They noted that even with emergency response on site, chances of survival from a direct strike of that magnitude was significantly low, as the window for successful resuscitation closes within minutes of cardiac arrest, and the delay caused by the remote terrain and active storm conditions made intervention effectively impossible. Investigators later confirmed that Peter had remained at one of the most exposed points along the coast during the storm's peak electrical activity, that the wet rocks, open terrain, and absence of any nearby shelter had made a direct strike not just possible, but likely. He had gone there to capture something unforgettable for his audience. In the end, they watched it happen, and I genuinely don't know how that felt. The next content creator also walked into danger, except this time the danger wasn't weather. It was a 160-foot fall from a crane on an evening when the light was perfect and the harness was still in the locker. It was the 15th of October, 2020 in Houston, Texas. The skyline was turning gold as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of orange and amber, the kind of evening that made even seasoned construction workers pause and look up. Emily Russell was 23 years old. She lived in Houston and worked at a downtown construction site as a crane operator, and had become known online for sharing life as a crane operator in Houston. For several years, she had posted photos and short videos from construction sites on Instagram and Facebook, where her unusual perspective, high above the city, attracted a loyal following. Viewers enjoyed seeing skylines, sunsets, and behind-the-scenes glimpses of massive construction projects from angles few people ever experienced. Earlier that year, Emily had also begun posting regularly on TikTok. Over several months, she built a growing audience by sharing clips from construction sites and documenting her workday, and her videos performed reasonably well. I guess a lot of people love watching a beautiful lady in a construction site. Emily noticed that the construction creators pulling the biggest numbers on TikTok were mostly men, and their content had a particular energy, physically daring, almost reckless, the kind of footage that made viewers feel the height and the danger in their chest. Emily wanted that same energy. She wanted her audience to feel what it was actually like to move through a structure like that, not just see it from a distance. That evening, with the sunset blazing behind the skyline, she believed she had found it. After her shift ended, Emily climbed toward the upper section of the crane, carrying her phone and camera equipment. She did not wear the fall protection harness required by company policy and was not authorized to be in that section of the crane after the day's shift. She felt that she had worked around cranes long enough to understand exactly what the risks were, but that same familiarity may have bred a quiet confidence that she could manage the exposure safely without the gear just this once. The harness was there, she knew where it was, she just decided the light wasn't going to wait. She needed the video to feel active, visceral, the kind of footage that showed her moving through the crane with ease, so she pushed farther along a narrow maintenance platform that was never designed for routine access. She stopped, reviewed the footage, and moved again, searching for the angle that would capture both the scale of the structure and the boldness of being on it. For a few moments, everything was still. Then a gust swept across the platform. Emily lost her balance and tried to recover by shifting her weight. As she corrected herself, one foot slipped on the exposed metal surface, and with no harness, no anchor, nothing to catch her, she fell. Witnesses on the ground below later recall seeing her stumble before falling. She plunged approximately 160 feet. Workers still on site heard shouting and called emergency services immediately. In this case, the higher they go, the harder they fall. First responders arrived within minutes and rushed Emily to a nearby trauma center where doctors found injuries consistent with a fall from extreme height. She was pronounced dead shortly afterward. Investigators later determined that the tragedy had not been caused by a single mistake, but by a chain of decisions made one after another, ignoring worsening wind conditions, entering an unauthorized area, leaving her safety equipment behind, and repositioning herself repeatedly in pursuit of better footage. Emily Russell had spent years capturing the beauty of the world from extraordinary heights. On that evening in October, the same height she had always loved took her life. The next story moves to Iceland, where a creator flew to one of the most dramatic landscapes on Earth, filmed everything from the approved distance, sat down to review it, and realized it looked exactly like everyone else's content. It was the 14th of September, 2021. The Icelandic sky sat wide and pale above the Fagradalsfjall volcanic system on the Reykjanes Peninsula. Black lava fields stretching in every direction, smoke rising from fresh fissures in the earth, the air carrying the faint sting of sulfur. 27-year-old Charlie Saunders lived in Portland, Oregon, where he worked as a freelance videographer and drone photographer. Most of his income came from filming events and creating promotional content for local businesses. In his spare time, he focused on building an audience online through travel and adventure videos. He had spent several years posting content across YouTube and Instagram and had joined TikTok the previous year. Although Charlie enjoyed creating videos, turning content creation into a full-time career remained his goal. He closely followed trends, studied successful creators, and paid attention to what attracted viewers, especially on TikTok, because TikTok was becoming popular among young audience. When videos of Iceland's volcanic activity began appearing online, Charlie immediately became interested. He had seen so many documentaries on geography and had always wanted to see a volcano up close, not just in regular videos. He decided to visit Iceland to experience it firsthand. Charlie spent several weeks planning his journey. He booked flights, arranged accommodations, and packed cameras, lenses, batteries, and other equipment needed for several days of filming. After arriving in Iceland, he spent several days filming from the designated observation areas, and somewhere in those hours, something shifted. The camera became secondary. Charlie had grown genuinely fascinated by what he was watching, the slow crawl of active lava across the landscape, the way freshly cooled rock formed strange textures and patterns, the science of it unfolding right in front of him. He wanted to understand it up close, not just film it. In the morning of that day, he spotted a section of recently cooled lava just beyond one of the marked safety barriers. The surface looked firm and flat, and the distance felt manageable. He crossed over, not chasing a better shot, but simply wanting to see it properly. The first few minutes felt like a revelation. He crouched low, studying the hardened crust, moving slowly and deliberately. The ground held beneath him. Nothing went wrong, so he kept going. What looks like solid ground on an active lava field is often a thin shell sitting over hollow voids, and those shells can fail without any warning at all. Important details Charlie never knew, but that was the purpose of the safety barrier. Charlie stopped to examine a formation more closely, shifted his weight, and the crust collapsed beneath his feet. He dropped through the surface and crashed onto broken rock below, tumbling several feet down a steep, jagged slope before striking a rocky outcrop. Visitors in the approved viewing area witnessed the collapse and contacted emergency services immediately. Rescue teams faced significant difficulty reaching him. Unstable crust, razor-edged formations, and hazardous volcanic gases required specialized precautions before they could advance. By the time they reached Charlie, he had suffered severe head trauma and multiple traumatic fractures. He was pronounced dead on the scene. Don't they say that curiosity killed the cat? Charlie was the cat in this case. Investigators recovered his camera nearby. The footage told a straightforward story. Each step had been answered with solid ground, nothing suggesting the next one would be any different right up until it was.